2023 was a great year for games. Well, when we think about it, really, it's been more weird. Don't get me wrong, outside of a few shaky launches, well, more than a few, the end product themselves, the games themselves were fantastic. Everything from indie to AA games to AAA games, even including some of the bigger outliers. But I'd be remiss if we didn't at least acknowledge all the people that were impacted by layoffs in the gaming industry this year. Somehow all the games sold, the record-breaking launches, the critical acclaim wasn't enough to keep all these incredible people making these games. So while this video is going to be about why Baldur's Gate 3 stood tall in a sea of great games in 2023 and took home the Game of the Year at the Game Awards, I just wanted to take a quick moment in this video to thank all the people that work on video games, the people that were impacted by layoffs. I'm so sorry that the video game industry let you down for the sake of an improved bottom line.
You crazy son of a bitch, you did.
All of that said, this isn't 2022 where it was really a two-horse race for Game of the Year between Elden Ring and God of War Ragnarok, which by the way wasn't really that close as Elden Ring took home the most Game of the Year awards of all time. Why Elden Ring beat God of War Ragnarok for Game of the Year? Please. This is why Baldur's Gate 3 beat everything for Game of the Year. Also, Spider-Man 2 fans, you're not going to like this one because Spider-Man 2 really wasn't a real contender for Game of the Year, and that's coming from someone who platinumed it and got all 19 inches of Venom. Hey, Danny with the DMGT here, your new favorite place for all things music, gaming, and tech. Last year around this time, I made a very similar video breaking down why Elden Ring beat God of War Ragnarok, and a lot of you liked it. It's got like 25,000 views, so thank you for that. We'll see if this turns into a long-running series, but I really just had to make a video about Baldur's Gate 3 because I didn't get around to making my review because I'm still playing through the game. I played so many games over the last 12 months. I think it's a personal record of how many games I played in 12 months, and partly because I was unemployed for half of it. And there are still games that I either haven't finished yet or haven't gotten around to playing that I want to. There have been so many good games in 2023. And somehow this year I still saw some videos that were admittedly probably more rage bait than anything else, talking about what happened to gaming, where's the games? If you're like a 2 or 3 game a year player, which by the way, no judgment, money's tight these days. But if you typically stick to your Maddens and Call of Duties and 2Ks and FIFAs, then yeah, that segment has gotten stagnant. But believe me when I say that the rest of the video gaming space and its products are at an all-time high. I firmly believe that there were at least 15 games this year that could make a legitimate case for why they should have been Game of the Year nominees. No matter how you would have sliced the 6 nominees that the Game Awards typically does, some game was going to get snubbed, and it's not because they were bad, it's because the rest of the games are that good. Diablo 4 had a fantastic initial month, and I know that some of the updates made it less fun. It still doesn't take away how incredible it was that first month. Hi-Fi Rush came completely out of left field and really gave Xbox a much needed jolt of life. Street Fighter 6 brought some much needed innovation and accessibility to the fighting game genre. Lies of P showed us that we could actually have some solid Souls-like from a developer that isn't from Software. Sea of Stars was a really good homage to the RPGs of old while still bringing new elements to freshen up the genre. Nintendo continues to push the Switch to its limits, but shows us that it's still a viable option to just focus on fun and raw gameplay with Super Mario Bros. Wonder and Pikmin 4. Resident Evil 4 Remake improved upon an already all-time great formula. Armored Core 6 shows that From Software still has some tricks up its sleeve. Cocoon, Dredge, Octopath Traveler 2, The Redemption of Cyberpunk 2077, Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which by the way, Cal Kestis is one of the best Jedi in any medium, Mortal Kombat 1, Final Fantasy 16, Pizza Tower, Dave the Diver, Hogwarts Legacy. No, this is a mediocre open world that is carried by its IP, and I stand by that. And even though I think I overrated Starfield with a 4 out of 5, it's really a 3 out of 5 game, that is still a solid video game. Most of these games that I just named have legitimate cases for Game of the Year if you plop them into the right year. And yeah, maybe even Spider-Man 2. But when it really came down to it and you look at the awards, the innovation, the critical acclaim, and the fan acclaim, there are 3 games that separated themselves from the field, and that's Alan Wake 2 as a dark horse, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and Baldur's Gate 3. Let me start with The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom because I do think it suffered a little bit from the sequel's dilemma. I love Tears of the Kingdom. If you didn't see my video where I reviewed Tears of the Kingdom and compared it to Breath of the Wild, the cliff notes are that to me, I never really held Breath of the Wild in as high regard that most of the gaming world did. I understood the praise for its exploration and open world design, but for the most part, it felt very empty to me. It didn't feel lived in. The combat mechanics are clunky, you're living in a bunch of menus, the shrines are repetitive, the puzzles are repetitive, and the mythic beasts are repetitive. Tears of the Kingdom improved on all of that so well that most people are now calling Breath of the Wild a tech demo, which I think proves me right and means that Breath of the Wild was never quite as good as it was praised to be. But more importantly, its flexibility in puzzle solving, traversal, not perfect but much improved story and narrative, meant that I finally felt strongly about this iteration of The Legend of Zelda that most people were feeling about Breath of the Wild, and it was very cool to finally get there. This was it. This was the lock for Game of the Year. Nintendo had somehow done it. They had one-upped Breath of the Wild, which a lot of people considered one of the greatest games of all time. Not me, but a lot of people did. So naturally, if you're going to improve on that formula, it's a lock for Game of the Year, right? Alan Wake 2 launches just 1 week after Spider-Man 2 and a little over a month before the Game Awards. Some people are screaming recency bias for its Game of the Year nomination, but God of War Ragnarok launched like a week before the nominees were announced last year, so I don't know what you're talking about. And at first glance, it's just another well-produced and graphically impressive survivor horror game. It's a little bit of a thriller, it's a little bit of Resident Evil, it's a little bit of The Last of Us, it's so much more than any one of those things. It's a weird game, and that's what makes Alan Wake 2 so special. Let me be clear, Alan Wake 2 is not going to be a game for everyone. Not everyone is going to love this game. But in a year where there are a ton of really good launches, of really refining existing formulas, Alan Wake 2 is not afraid to take some major risks. It's almost Kojima-like in its strangeness and its quirkiness and the way that it tries to deliver a message. Sam Lake and the rest of the team over at Remedy are really cooking something special over there that is really hard to describe into words, and you just have to experience for yourself to understand. But the way that you interact with the pre-recorded cutscenes of real-life actors and the in-game actors in the game, along with the environmental puzzle mechanics that isn't just a sticky note with the passcode to the lock in another room, the use of lighting as both a combat and environmental mechanic, the use of Saga Anderson's mind plays for mystery solving, the use of Alan Wake's plot board to change scenes and make retracing your steps actually engaging, the music, the Koskela Brothers commercial. There's a solid 20-minute short film in this game that you can just watch, entirely optional. Some of you are probably hearing this and are like, okay, but what about the game? Where's the actual game? And I get it. That probably would have been me on the other side if I haven't played this game, but once you experience this game, the whole is truly greater than the sum of its parts, and that's the reason why this game walked away with 3 Game Awards. For a moment, I really thought this one had a chance to take the whole thing. You really need to give this game a shot. I'm sitting on a script about the stroke of genius that is the musical section in this game. There's a musical section in this game. Remember Tears of the Kingdom, the lock for Game of the Year that had already improved an all-time great formula, allegedly? Alan Wake 2, 3 awards to Tears of the Kingdom's 1.
And the Game of the Year is Baldur's Gate 3.
Games like Baldur's Gate 3 don't win Game of the Year, and it's not for some weird reason like it's a turn-based game, it's a CRPG, it has romancing mechanics. Also, some of you need to get over the bear scene. Yeah, it's a little weird, but it's entirely optional. You have to go through so many romancing pieces of dialogue to even get there. Like, you cannot land into that scene by accident, okay? It's just not going to happen. No, it's not for any of those reasons. Game of the Year at the Game Awards has historically gone to the game with the strong narrative, action-adventure game, good mechanics, sometimes both, but I personally think it'd be insane to call any of the past winners the same type of game. That's effectively calling them video games. Okay, they all fall under that video game umbrella. I don't know, that's just super reductive to me, and it screams old-timer being on, yeah, see, your video games are not what they used to be, see, where my pixels and buttons, see? I don't know why I went 1940s gangster with it. It was facetious. See, that's what that sounds like. I think Disco Elysium is probably the best example of a similar type of game. It's not the same type of game, but a similar CRPG type game that won 4 awards at the 2019 Game Awards, but was snubbed from the Game of the Year category. This is why I've spent the first 7 minutes of this video talking about everything but Baldur's Gate 3 to really highlight how much the odds were stacked against this game. Where Elden Ring in 2022 was the beast from Software that was building momentum with each installment that they would release, outside of that Disco Elysium example, there's really no instance of building momentum for CRPGs or games of this type, at least not to the scale and recognition. I know that Divinity Original Sin 2 and Pillars of Eternity are great games as well. Because despite all of that, Baldur's Gate 3 finally managed to break through both into the mainstream but also critical acclaim and get the recognition that Larian Studios definitely worked so hard to get. Yes, at its bare bones, it's a turn-based game like a Pokemon game is. Yes, it's based on the world of Dungeons and Dragons. Yes, there's a dice rolling mechanic. But at its very core, Baldur's Gate 3 does 2 things that all games typically aspire to: escapism or immersion into its world, and interactivity, typically what we associate with fun. What happens if I do and press X? What happens if I push the limits and the rules of this game? Turns out that Baldur's Gate 3 not only pushes back, but it responds in tandem, just in a way that we're not used to as mainstream audiences. In Skyrim, you can take the road up the mountain, or you can take your horse and clip your way up the mountain. It's not necessarily the way that the game intended, but you can do it, kind of. You can pretty much attack and kill any NPC that you see, with the exception of some named characters and children, but the game will typically punish you by giving you a really high bounty or just having all the guards attack you so much that it really makes it impossible to progress and you have to reload a save. Notoriously, the chickens in The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, where if you attack one enough, an infinite amount of chickens start spawning and kill you, and then the game just reloads. It's part of the reason why speedrunning, and in particular any percent speedrunning, is so popular, because it's fun to figure out a way to break the game. Most games, even non-narrative driven ones, just want you to follow a path path or a similar path in order to trigger the right cutscene, in order to unlock the right weapon and ability to progress to the next level. And sometimes you're a little too clever for your own good and the game says, I'm sorry, I'm actually not that smart to allow you to do that. You gotta go follow the path. And it's part of the reason why Tears of the Kingdom was so good. And I'm not saying that Baldur's Gate 3 does not have any of those limitations, because it absolutely does. It's still a game with rules, but the sheer amount of staggering decisions that you can make in this game and that the game accounts for is incredible, and I don't know how they did it. It's part of the reason why some mainstream AAA developers were like, this is unreasonable for us to set as a standard moving forward. And no, you ungrateful gamers, and I know that it's not all of you, but someone's already going like, it's because they're lazy. No, it's not because they're lazy. It's because the decision makers and the people above them would either not give them the resources or allow them to do it because it'd be too expensive, hence the whole point about layoffs at the beginning of this video. I'm sorry, I've been dealing with a bunch of really obnoxious Spider-Man 2 fans, actually just overall annoying gamers on TikTok this week. But anyways, instead, what Larian Studios decided to do with Baldur's Gate 3 is, hey, if you want to kill all your major companions and remove all those storylines, fine, you can do that, and here's how this game is going to play out. Sometimes it's handled by a punishment in the game, by losing the storyline, and sometimes you will get a unique storyline that you would not have gotten otherwise, and it feels like such a rewarding way to experience and experiment truly in this game. Oh, there's this giant block thing in your way or heavy thing that you're not strong enough to push because it's not your character build, but hey, what if you throw some grease at it and make it slippier and you kind of push it around and that'll work. This game allows you to do that, but then also if there's like a fire too close to it and then you throw the grease, it'll all ignite and then you get burned, and sometimes it's annoying, but then you realize that these are the rules of the game, that the rules are you can really do whatever you want, but you should expect it to respond in tandem. So to be fair, that massive flexibility has gotten this game into a little bit of trouble, and that's the reason why there have been so many patches since its launch. But then you throw all that flexibility and those mechanics and that world interactivity into combat mechanics and gameplay combat scenarios. You can approach them however you want. It's almost like playing a game of chess, but the rules are you can throw your rook at the king if you wanted to. That's why the dice mechanic I think makes sense to me, because the game goes, all right, is your character actually good enough to pull this off? And sometimes you get lucky and you hit it, and sometimes you aren't lucky and you don't hit it because you're not strong enough, and it just results in a very funny interaction. If you're curious at all to see how turn-based combat could be engaging, fun, and interactive, try this game out, because I promise you this is how you do it. I haven't even touched on the writing and the acting and voice acting in this game, which could compete with any story game ever released. Baldur's Gate 3, almost similar to From Software and Elden Ring, is a game that only Larian Studios could have made at this point in time. Independent has listened to player feedback over years. Even if this gameplay and game style is not your cup of tea, and that would be totally fair, you cannot deny the quality and the sheer amount of passion that went into Baldur's Gate 3, and that's why no other game could have won this year. Once again, this isn't to discredit any of the other games. I think in particular Tears of the Kingdom was a very close second, because in spirits it has a lot of similar philosophies to how you approach freedom of exploration and interactivity, where Alan Wake 2 definitely takes a little bit more of the guided approach, but handles its narrative and the way it's delivering its story in such a unique way that it also deserved its awards and its consideration. Ultimately, the real winners are the gamers. There is no loser this year. You have options to no end. And yeah, this video makes me a huge nerd, but I truly believe that video gaming is a form of art, and Baldur's Gate 3, kind of like Elden Ring last year, just has reinvigorated my love for video games and just keeps it going, and I'm looking forward to 2024. Alright, that's it. That's why Baldur's Gate 3 won Game of the Year, at least in this nobody's opinion. But hey, if you watch it all the way to the end, thank you, I appreciate it. Subscribe. We're going to be at CES in January, so I'm going to be doing a lot of tech stuff too. I promise I'm going to swing back around to the music stuff. I'll hit you with my 10 best games of the year, 10 best albums of the year, and then we'll be into 2024. So if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Consider sharing and leaving the comments. What was your favorite game of the year? Consider subscribing. Thanks again. I'm Danny with the DMGT. I'll catch you next time.